I think what the Democrats are hoping for in most of those states is a messy primary. I mean, you're talking about states, I think all of them, that Donald Trump won by double digits.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined by Sean Trende. He's our senior elections analyst. Sean, good to have you.
Great to be back.
All right. So let's talk about the Senate in 2026. So we got news last week that Tina Smith, Senator, Democrat from Minnesota, announced she is not going to run for re-election. This is the second. I believe Gary Peters in Michigan is the other Democrat who has said that he is not going to run for re-election. So we're going to have two Dem open seats. Obviously, Minnesota is probably a little bit more blue than Michigan is at this point. But I mean, how big of a deal is this? Is this a real problem for the Democrats and their chances to take back the Senate?
Minnesota, not so much. Michigan is a little bit of a headache. But Minnesota, what's happened in the Midwest is that Democrats have kind of hemorrhaged among rural white voters in the Midwest, of whom there are generally a lot and who had kind of held on to their Democratic roots for a long time. Now that's not the case, and that really hurts them in a state like Wisconsin. The problem is that Minnesota has Minneapolis, and something like two-thirds of the votes in the state get cast in the Minneapolis metro area. It really dominates the state's politics, and so far it's offset the Republican trend that they're getting in the rurals, and just it keeps the state kind of tantalizingly out of reach for Republicans.
I saw some headline that said Tim Walz is actually thinking about maybe joining into that race. Um, is that a good idea? Do you think he'd be the prohibitive favorite just because he's so well known in the state now?
I think in a general election, he probably would be. Now, the one kind of caveat on all this is that there will be a primary. His lieutenant governor said she was going to run, kind of tried to get ahead of the Walsh train. Um, Angie Craig is a Democrat from the suburbs of Minneapolis, and she's exploring. And if you do get this badly divided field of kind of normie Democrats, if you will, it opens the chance that someone like Ilhan Omar or someone well to the left of the state might squeak through with a small plurality. And that could make the race interesting.
Just sort of broadening the lens here, Sean, and looking at the map, they're really it's not a great map for Democrats. I mean, they're going to need four seats, right? It's 53-47 right now, so getting to 50-50 does not help them because JD Vance will still be the vice president. And you look, we've got basically four races that are considered toss-ups, and two of them Republican. We've got North Carolina and Maine. Uh, and then on the Democratic side, you've got Georgia with John Ossoff and the aforementioned Michigan. Those are going to be tough holds for Democrats, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, we just had an open race in Michigan with Trump on the top of the ticket and a good GOP environment that the Republicans couldn't convert. So I think that's one where you probably put a thumb on the scale for the Democrats to start. But that Georgia race is going to be it's going to be a tough hold for Democrats, especially if Governor Kemp gets in, who is one of the last of the Republicans who kind of have a foot in both camp of MAGA and normie Republicans. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, what Democrats I think really want is to get it down where Murkowski and Collins start to become relevant again, and they can have then they can start to hopefully, in their minds at least, gum up the works a bit in the Senate.
Well, let's talk about Susan Collins because she is a perennial target for Democrats, but an absolute survivor, always manages to beat the odds. Is she set up to do that again this year? Again, Trump's not going to be on the top of the ticket. And, Democrats think that that's a place where they can win.
I mean, it's a blue state, right? Republicans haven't carried it for president since 1988, but at the same time, I think people get carried away with that. It's a blue state, but it's not Ohio. It's not a counterpart to Ohio or Montana, right? And so Collins probably has to run like 4 points ahead of Trump, where Trump was to win. That's doable. It's not a Herculean effort like I'm already forgetting the name of the governor of Maryland who couldn't pull it off, or Sherrod Brown or John
Larry
Tester.
Hogan.
Larry Hogan. I kept coming up with Larry Craig, and that's a very different Senate candidate. Um, but yeah, it's going to be a tough hold. But she's a survivor. She ran 20 points ahead of John McCain in 2008, and Democrats thought they had her number in 2000, and she ended up winning with the majority of the votes. So you'd be foolish to write her off.
All right, last toss up that we'll discuss is North Carolina. Tom Tillis. I mean, that's a state, that is trends more and more blue. Although Trump won it this time around. Again, is that a realistic opportunity for Democrats?
It's a weird state because, they have carried the state once at the presidential level since 1992, barely in 2008. They've won one Senate election in recent years there, 2008 again with Kay Hagan. Um, but they still win the governorship. They usually win a couple of the statewide races. The big question there is whether the governor of the state gets in. If Governor Cooper gets in, it's a really tough race for Tillis, who isn't anything special, right? He doesn't have a strong brand of his own. If Cooper does take a pass on it, well, I think you got to upgrade Tillis's chances significantly.
We're speaking with Sean Trende, senior elections analyst for Real Clear Politics. We're talking about the 2026 Senate map and what it might mean for the Democrats' chances to retake the upper chamber. As I mentioned earlier, they will need a net gain of 4 seats to do that. So I guess the good news for Democrats is right now, we have listed four leaning Republican seats, Sean. We have one of those is Florida, which, Ashley Moody's running for official elections. She was appointed there, but that's been a very Republican state. Another one is you've got Ohio. John Husted is same thing, running for to finish out that term. John Cornyn in Texas and Joni Ernst in Iowa. You can remember not too long ago, she was the subject of some rumblings about a primary challenge because of the way that she was interacting with Pete Hegseth and his nomination. It looks like that might have passed. Give us what's your sense of those races? Are those realistic opportunities for Democrats in, what historically would be not a great year for Republicans?
I think what the Democrats are hoping for in most of those states is a messy primary. I mean, you're talking about states, I think all of them that Donald Trump won by double digits. All of them except, the three Texas, I guess two, Texas and Iowa have well-established incumbents. Florida, the senator is well respected. In Ohio, I think, Democrats are really banking on first Sherrod Brown running again and then Husted getting primaried by a MAGA type candidate. If that comes to pass, then I think it could get spicy, as they say. But Husted is kind of in the tradition of establishment GOPers, the type of Republican that runs well in the state. So I'm not sure even if Brown gets in, how vulnerable Husted would end up being.
And on the Democratic side, there are only two that we currently have rated as leans Democrat. We mentioned at the top of the show, Minnesota, the open seat now where Tina Smith is retiring, but also New Hampshire. Jeanne Shaheen is up for reelection. Are they vulnerable there, or is that a state that they should probably carry?
Yeah, if Shaheen retires, you could definitely see. I mean, Republicans have been competitive there in Senate races, and they haven't pulled it off, but they've had some tight races. I think what that comes down, like I said, is if Shaheen retires, and assuming Republicans then nominated a non-Don Baldock type candidate to run for the seat. But otherwise, it's a small playing field. We should remember that in 2006, it didn't look like the Democrats had a chance. No one would have thought Virginia was competitive at the beginning of the cycle. Similarly in 2010, I think most of us thought at the beginning of the cycle that Democrats would probably expand their majority, given Republican retirements and whatnot. So there's still, I mean, we are in like the early
It's
stages of the
early.
preseason. Yeah.
Right. Any potential, again, with the caveat that it's very, very early and tough to tell. When you look at that map, are there any races on there that you're like, I'm going to keep an eye on this one because this could, New Mexico, Colorado, any places, you mentioned Virginia, any places where you're going to just have your sort of side eye working on, on that state?
Yeah, I would pay attention to Alaska if Peltola gets in. I mean, she did just lose re-election. Again, this is not, you don't want to get too carried away with it. And I think sometimes online election Twitter is like, oh, she gets in, it's a toss-up. No, it's still a state that is pretty Republican, but keep an eye on it. The other one is Virginia. If Warner were to retire and Youngkin were to get in, that would rocket up the charts pretty quickly.
All right. Well, obviously, we're going to be talking about this a lot. We got 2 years to do it, Sean. But thanks for the early look. We appreciate you, Sean Trende, Senior Elections Analyst for Real Clear Politics.